I never thought I'd be the guy sitting in a dark sedan at 3 in the morning, staring at the glow of my own living room window, wondering how my entire life managed to unravel in the span of a single Tuesday. You see these stories online, or you hear about them from a friend of a friend over a couple of beers at a local pub, and you always think, man, that's rough, but it would never happen to me. You think your marriage is different. You think your bond with your childhood best friend is made of something indestructible, forged in the fires of high school football games, crappy college apartments, and late-night drives through the suburbs of Ohio. But the truth is, trust is a fragile piece of glass, and once someone shatters it, you spend the rest of your life stepping on the shards, bleeding out while trying to figure out how it all went so wrong. Let me go back to the beginning, back to when things were still good. My name is Mark, and I've been married to Chloe for 4 years. Chloe was the kind of woman who lit up any room she walked into, a sharp, vibrant graphic designer with a laugh that could pull you out of the deepest funk. We had the whole American dream lined up perfectly. We bought a small, beautiful 3-bedroom house in a quiet neighborhood just outside of Columbus. It had a wraparound porch, a big backyard for the dog we planned to get, and a mortgage that we could comfortably afford. I worked as a regional logistics manager for a supply chain company, which meant a lot of late nights and occasional overnight trips to distribution centers across the state line. But Chloe was always incredibly supportive. She'd pack me a lunch, leave a little sticky note with a smiley face on my dashboard, and tell me she couldn't wait for me to get back. I genuinely believed I was the luckiest guy alive. Then there was Julian. Julian had been my best friend since we were 7 years old. We grew up on the same street, played on the same varsity baseball team, and even went to the same university. He was the brother I never had. When my dad passed away during my sophomore year of college, Julian was the one who sat with me on the porch steps for 12 hours straight, not saying a word, just making sure I wasn't alone. He was the best man at my wedding, standing right next to me, raising a glass of bourbon, and telling the entire reception that Chloe was the best thing that ever happened to me and that I better never screw it up. But life hits people differently. While my career took off and my life settled into a comfortable, predictable domestic bliss, Julian struggled. He was an aspiring musician, a brilliant guitar player who just couldn't seem to find his footing in the real world. He bounced from gig to gig, bartender job to bartender job, always one late rent check away from eviction. About 6 months ago, his luck finally ran out completely. His landlord and the city decided to convert his building into luxury condos, and Julian was given 30 days to pack up his life. He didn't have the savings for a security deposit on a new place, and his car's transmission had just died on the interstate. When he called me from a diner on Route 23, sounding absolutely broken and defeated, I didn't even hesitate. I didn't even check with Chloe first, which was my first mistake, though she was totally on board when I told her. I told Julian to pack his bags, grab his guitars, and come crash on our couch for a few weeks until he could get back on his feet. Our couch was a massive, comfortable, L-shaped sectional in the basement living room, a space that had its own half bath and plenty of privacy. It felt like the perfect solution. I wanted to help my brother, and Chloe agreed that it was the right thing to do. She told me she loved how generous I was. The first few weeks were actually great. It felt like a throwback to our college days. Julian would cook these massive pasta dinners for us when I got home from work, and the 3 of us would sit around the kitchen island, drinking cheap red wine and laughing about old stories from high school. He was helpful around the house, too. He mowed the lawn, fixed a leaky faucet in the guest bathroom, and would take out the trash without being asked. Chloe seemed to really enjoy the extra company, especially since my work hours were starting to ramp up due to a major corporate merger. But as the weeks bled into months, the dynamic in the house began to shift in ways that were so subtle, so microscopic that I didn't even notice them at first. You know how they say a frog doesn't notice the water heating up until it's already boiling? That was me. I was the frog. It started with small things. I'd come home from a grueling 12-hour shift, exhausted to my bones, and walk into the kitchen to find Julian and Chloe sitting close together at the counter, hunched over her laptop. They'd be laughing hysterically at some inside joke, and the moment I walked through the door, the laughter would die down just a fraction of a second too late. It wasn't a guilty silence, or at least it didn't feel like one at the time. It just felt like I had interrupted a conversation I wasn't a part of. Julian would look up, smile, and say, "Hey man, look at this crazy font Chloe found for my band's new flyer." And I'd smile, pat him on the back, get a glass of water, and head upstairs to shower, feeling grateful that my wife and my best friend got along so well. I mean, you hear horror stories about wives hating their husbands' friends, so I thought I was blessed. Then I started noticing changes in Chloe's behavior. She became incredibly invested in fitness all of a sudden. She started buying expensive athleisure wear, spending hours at the gym, and changing her diet. Now, there's nothing wrong with wanting to be healthy, but she also started dressing differently around the house. Instead of the oversized college sweatshirts and sweatpants she usually wore on weekends, she started wearing tight yoga pants and cropped tank tops, even when it was just the three of us watching a movie in the living room. I remember one night we were watching some crime documentary, and Chloe was sitting on the floor, leaning her back against the couch right where Julian's legs were stretched out. Her shoulder was brushing against his shin. It was a completely casual pose, the kind of thing you might see among siblings, but something inside my chest tightened. A tiny, ugly spark of jealousy flared up, and I immediately felt disgusted with myself for even thinking it. This was Julian. This was Chloe. They loved me. They would never. I pushed the thoughts down, burying them under a mountain of work stress. I started taking on more overtime, convincing myself that I was just being paranoid because I was tired. But the universe has a funny way of forcing you to see what you're trying so hard to ignore. The real shift happened in early May. I had to fly out to Chicago for a 3-day logistics conference. It was a big deal for my career, a chance to secure a promotion that would finally allow us to pay off the rest of our debt and maybe start a family. The night before I left, Chloe was unusually affectionate. She made my favorite steak dinner, wore the lingerie I bought her for our anniversary, and whispered how much she was going to miss me while I was gone. When I kissed her goodbye at the front door the next morning, her eyes looked watery, almost sad. Julian came out of the basement, gave me a big bear hug, and said, "Go kill it, man. Don't worry about the house. I've got everything covered here." I looked into my best friend's eyes, saw nothing but sincerity, and drove to the airport feeling like a king. The conference was a whirlwind of meetings, presentations, and corporate networking events. By Tuesday evening, I was completely drained. My flight back to Columbus wasn't scheduled until Wednesday afternoon, but around 7 in the evening on Tuesday night, I got an email from the airline stating that my Wednesday flight had been canceled due to a severe storm front moving in from the west. The airline offered to rebook me on a flight the following evening, or I could take a late-night flight leaving Chicago at 10:30 p.m. that very night. I looked at my hotel room, looked at my packed suitcase, and realized how badly I just wanted to sleep in my own bed next to my wife. I didn't call Chloe to tell her. I wanted it to be a surprise. I wanted to walk into our bedroom, slide under the covers, and shock her with my early return. It was supposed to be a romantic, spontaneous gesture. The flight was bumpy, but we landed in Columbus just before midnight. I grabbed my bag, took an Uber back to our suburban neighborhood, and had the driver drop me off at the end of the driveway so the headlights wouldn't wake anyone up. The air was crisp and cool as I walked up the driveway. The house was completely dark, except for the dim amber glow of the porch light and a faint light coming from the second-story window of our master bedroom. My heart did a little happy flutter. She was still awake. Maybe she was reading or watching a show, waiting for me in her own way. I quietly unlocked the front door, stepping into the dark entryway. I slid my shoes off, set my suitcase down on the hardwood floor with absolute precision so it wouldn't make a sound, and began to make my way up the carpeted stairs. The house was dead silent, save for the rhythmic ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway. But as I reached the top landing, just outside our bedroom door, I heard a sound that made my blood instantly turn to ice. It wasn't the sound of a television. It was a low, breathless laugh, followed by the soft, unmistakable creak of our mattress. The sound seemed to hang in the heavy air of the hallway, vibrating right through the soles of my feet. For a second, my brain completely short-circuited. It's a strange thing how your mind will frantically scramble to find any logical explanation, no matter how absurd, just to protect you from a truth that will break you. I thought maybe Chloe was watching a movie with the volume turned down low. I thought maybe the dog we didn't own had somehow materialized in our room. But then I heard it again. It was a deep, guttural murmur, a voice that didn't belong to my wife, followed by a breathless, hitching gasp from Chloe that I knew better than my own name. It was the specific sound she only made when she was completely consumed by passion, a sound that had belonged exclusively to me for the last 6 years of our lives. My hand froze an inch away from the polished brass doorknob. My fingers were trembling so violently I could hear the faint click of my wedding ring tapping against the metal. The air in the hallway suddenly felt thick, suffocating, like trying to breathe underwater. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to turn around, to run down the stairs, to get back into the safety of the dark night and pretend I had never walked through that door. But my feet were rooted to the floor. The world around me narrowed down to that single solid piece of painted white wood, separating me from a reality I knew would destroy everything I had ever built. I didn't turn the knob slowly. I didn't give them a warning. I gripped the brass, twisted it hard, and flung the door open so fiercely it bounced off the rubber stopper against the wall with a loud, echoing crack. The scene that met my eyes will be burned into my retinas until the day I die. The bedside lamp was on, casting a warm golden glow across the room, the same lamp I had bought Chloe for her birthday last year. The sheets were tangled and tossed to the foot of the bed, and there, in the center of our mattress, was my best friend, Julian, his bare back glistening under the light, pinned against the silhouette of my wife. When the door slammed open, they both froze, locking into a grotesque panic tableau like deer caught in high beams. Julian scrambled backwards so fast he nearly fell off the far side of the bed, dragging a corner of the duvet with him to cover his waist. His face, usually so full of easygoing confidence and charm, turned a sickly, ashen gray. His mouth hung open, his chest heaving as he stared at me, his eyes wide with a terror that felt entirely foreign on a man I had known my entire life. Chloe let out a sharp, piercing shriek that sounded like a wounded animal. She immediately pulled her knees to her chest, grabbing a pillow to shield herself, her long blonde hair tangled wildly around her face. Her cheeks were flushed, her breathing ragged, and as her eyes met mine, the shock in them instantly melted into a look of absolute, unadulterated horror. Nobody spoke. The silence in the room was deafening, heavy with the weight of an entire universe collapsing in on itself. I stood in the doorway, my hands hanging uselessly at my sides, feeling a bizarre, detached numbness washing over me. It felt like I was watching a scene from a movie, like I was an actor standing on a set, waiting for the director to yell cut so we could all laugh and go home. But the smell of Chloe's expensive lavender perfume, mixed with the scent of another man's sweat, brought me crashing back to earth with the force of a freight train. "Mark," Julian finally choked out, his voice cracking on my name. He reached out a hand, his fingers trembling in the air between us. "Mark, man, please, it's not— oh God, Mark, I'm so sorry." Hearing his voice break the silence was like a spark hitting a powder keg. The numbness vanished, replaced instantly by a blinding, scorching wave of white-hot rage that roared through my veins. I didn't think, I didn't analyze. I lunged across the bedroom, my vision narrowing until all I could see was Julian's face. I grabbed him by the front of his shoulders, dragging him off the bed and slamming him hard against the hardwood floor. The sound of his back hitting the ground echoed through the room. "Get out!" I roared, the sound tearing from my throat so violently it felt like it was ripping my vocal cords to shreds. "Get the hell out of my house!" "Mark, stop! Please, you're going to hurt him!" Chloe screamed from the bed, her voice hysterical, tears finally spilling over her eyelids and streaking through her makeup. She reached out toward me, but I spun around to face her, and the sheer fury in my expression made her flinch back into the pillows, trembling. "Don't you dare speak to me!" I shouted at her, my voice shaking with a mixture of rage and a sudden, agonizing heartbreak that felt like a physical blade twisting in my ribs. "Don't you look at me, Chloe. Don't you say a single word." Julian was on his hands and knees now, coughing, desperately scrambling across the floor to gather his clothes, which were scattered carelessly across our rug. He didn't even try to defend himself. He didn't look me in the eye. He just grabbed his jeans, his shirt, and his boots, holding them against his chest like a shield as he stumbled out into the hallway, completely naked, his breath coming in ragged, terrified gasps. I followed him out, watching him trip down the stairs in the dark, the sound of his frantic footsteps fading as he sprinted out the front door into the cool midnight air. I stood at the top of the stairs for a long time, my chest heaving, listening to the distant sound of his car engine turning over and roaring away down the street. He didn't even go down to the basement to get his guitars. He just fled. When I turned back into the bedroom, Chloe was sitting on the edge of the bed, wrapped tightly in a bedsheet, sobbing uncontrollably. Her shoulders shook, and she kept her face buried in her hands, refusing to look at me. The sight of her, the woman I had promised to love and protect for the rest of my life, sitting in the ruins of our marriage, made me feel completely sick to my stomach. I walked over to the dresser, leaning my weight against the heavy wood just to keep myself upright. My legs felt like lead. "How long?" I asked, my voice dropping to a low, deadly quiet whisper that sounded entirely hollow. Chloe didn't answer right away. She just kept crying, her breath hitching. "Mark, please, it was a mistake. We didn't mean for it to happen. It just happened." "Nothing just happened, Chloe," I snapped, the volume of my voice rising again, cutting through her tears. "You don't just accidentally trip and fall into my best friend's arms in our bed while I'm away working to pay for this damn house. How long has this been going on?" She swallowed hard, finally looking up at me, her eyes red and swollen, her skin pale. Since the end of March," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "About 2 weeks after he moved into the basement." 2 months. For 2 whole months, my wife and my best friend had been carrying on an affair right under my nose. Every time I had come home late from work, every time I had thanked Julian for helping out around the house, every time Chloe had kissed me goodbye with that soft, sad look in her eyes, it had all been a lie. They had been laughing at me. They had been waiting for me to leave the house so they could turn my sanctuary into their playground. The betrayal felt like a physical weight crushing down on my chest, making it impossible to draw a full breath. I looked around the room, seeing everything through a completely distorted lens. The pictures of our wedding on the wall, the custom jewelry box I had made for her, the very sheets beneath her. It was all tainted. It was all a farce. "I want you to leave," I said, my voice dead, devoid of any emotion now. The rage had burned itself out, leaving nothing but an empty, icy crater where my heart used to be. "Mark, please, don't do this," she begged, throwing the sheet off and reaching for my hand. But I stepped back, out of her reach, looking at her with a cold detachment that seemed to terrify her more than the shouting. "It's middle of the night. Where am I supposed to go? Let's just talk about this, please. We can fix this. We can go to counseling." "Fix this?" I let out a bitter, joyless laugh that sounded completely unhinged. "You slept with Julian, Chloe, in our bed. There is nothing to fix. Pack a bag, get in your car, and go to a hotel. If you're not out of this house in 10 minutes, I'm putting everything you own out on the lawn." The next 10 minutes felt like a slow-motion montage of a car crash. Chloe didn't say another word. She realized, looking at my face, that the man she had been married to for 4 years was completely gone, replaced by a cold, unyielding stranger. She threw on a pair of sweatpants and an old t-shirt, ironically, one of my old college shirts, and frantically stuffed a handful of clothes, her toothbrush, and her makeup bag into a small leather duffel. Her movements were chaotic, her hands shaking so violently that she dropped her hairbrush twice, the plastic clattering loudly against the floorboards. Each sound sent a sharp spike of adrenaline through my nerves, but I just stood there, leaning against the dresser with my arms crossed, watching her pack away the remnants of our life together. When she finally zipped the bag, she paused at the foot of the bed. She looked at me, her eyes completely red, her lips trembling. She looked small, desperate, and fragile. A part of me, the old part of me that had spent years protecting her from every cold breeze and bad day, wanted to step forward, pull her into my arms, and tell her it was all just a bad dream. But then my eyes drifted to the wrinkled, messy center of the mattress, and the mental image of Julian's hands on her body flashed behind my eyelids like a lightning strike. The brief flash of sympathy died instantly, replaced by a cold, heavy wall of cement. "Mark, I love you," she whispered, her voice cracking as a fresh wave of tears spilled down her cheeks. "I know you don't believe me right now, but I do. I am so, so sorry." "Goodbye, Chloe," I said. My voice didn't shake. It was flat, hollow, and final. She let out a small, broken sob, gripped the handle of her bag tight, and walked past me. I didn't turn around to watch her go. I just listened to the sound of her bare feet moving down the hallway, the creak of the third step from the top that I had been meaning to fix for months, and the heavy thud of the front door clicking shut behind her. A few moments later, the headlights of her crossover SUV cut through the DAC bedroom windows, sweeping across the ceiling as she backed out of the driveway and drove off into the night. Then, the house went completely, agonizingly silent. I collapsed onto the floor right where I stood, my back sliding down the front of the dresser until my jeans hit the wood. I pulled my knees up to my chest and buried my face in my hands. That was the moment the reality finally broke through the shock. The tears didn't just come, they ripped out of me in heavy, chest-heaving dry heaves that made my ribs ache. I cried for the loss of my wife. I cried for the loss of my best friend. I cried for the absolute stupidity of my own blind trust, for every time I had smiled and left them alone together, thinking I was being a good husband and a great friend. I felt smaller than I ever had in my entire life, like a ghost haunting the empty rooms of a life that no longer belonged to me. I don't know how long I sat there on the floor. The golden light of the bedside lamp kept burning, illuminating the twisted sheets on the bed, a constant, mocking reminder of what had taken place just an hour prior. Eventually, the sky outside the window began to turn a pale, bruised shade of purple as the sun started to peek over the suburban horizon. The birds started chirping in the oak trees outside, a cheerful, normal sound that felt completely offensive given the wreckage inside my walls. I forced myself up onto my feet, my muscles stiff and aching as if I had just run a marathon. I couldn't look at the bed anymore. I walked down the hallway, every step feeling heavier than the last, and descended into the basement. The basement was exactly how Julian had left it before he went upstairs to sleep with my wife. His acoustic guitar was resting in its stand in the corner, the polished wood catching the faint morning light filtering through the high window. A half-empty bag of tortilla chips sat on the coffee table, next to an empty beer bottle. A pair of his muddy running shoes were kicked off near the bottom of the stairs. This was the space I had given him, out of pure, unselfish love. I had looked at this man, seen him struggling in the dirt, and offered him a hand up. And while I was out working late shifts, climbing the corporate ladder to build a future, he had been using my generosity to dismantle my home from the inside out. A sudden surge of frantic energy overtook my exhaustion. I went into the storage closet, grabbed 4 massive black industrial trash bags, and began tearing through Julian's things. I didn't fold anything. I didn't care if things broke. I ripped his clothes off the hangers in the temporary wardrobe, stuffing them into the bags with brutal force. I scooped up his lyric notebooks, his charging cords, his books, and his cologne, throwing them into the plastic. I grabbed his precious electric guitar, the one his father had given him, and shoved it into its soft gig bag without wrapping the cords properly. I carried the heavy bags up the basement stairs, 2 at a time, my breath coming in ragged pants. I opened the front door, walked out onto the dew-soaked grass of the front lawn, and dumped the bags right by the curb next to the recycling bins. I dragged his guitars out next, laying them flat on the damp grass, completely indifferent to whether the morning humidity ruined the wood. I wanted it all gone. I wanted every trace of his existence erased from my property before the neighbors even woke up to get their morning papers. By the time I walked back inside, my phone was buzzing violently in my pocket. I pulled it out, expecting a string of desperate texts from Chloe, but the screen displayed a name that made my stomach tighten into a hard knot. Arthur. Arthur was Chloe's father. He was a retired construction foreman, a towering, old-school man's man with a thick gray beard and hands like blocks of concrete. He was a man of few words, but he had always treated me with an immense amount of respect. When I asked him for his daughter's hand in marriage 5 years ago at a local diner over breakfast, he had looked me dead in the eye, squeezed my shoulder, and said, "You're a good man, Mark. Take care of my girl, and you'll always have a seat at my table." We had gone fishing together, built the backyard deck together, and shared countless quiet moments of mutual respect. My hand shook as I slid the screen to answer the call. I pressed the phone to my ear, my voice caught in my throat. "Mark." Arthur's deep, gravelly voice came through the speaker. He didn't say hello. He sounded incredibly tired, his voice carrying a weight that I had never heard in it before. "Chloe just showed up at the house. She's in the kitchen with her mother, crying so hard she can barely breathe." I closed my eyes, leaning my forehead against the cool drywall of the entryway. "Arthur," I choked out, the tears threatening to surface again. "I'm sorry you have to be involved in this." "She told me what happened, son," Arthur said, interrupting me gently. There was a long, heavy pause on the line, the sound of his slow, deliberate breathing filling the silence. "She told me everything. About Julian. About what you walked into last night." I waited for the defense. I waited for the father to protect his daughter, to tell me that there were two sides to every story, or to ask me to calm down and take her back. But Arthur didn't do any of that. "I want you to know something, Mark," Arthur said, his voice dropping an octave, steady and absolute. "I raised her, but I didn't raise her to be a thief of another man's dignity. What she did to you, what they did to you in your own home, it's a disgrace. I am deeply, deeply ashamed of her right now." Hearing those words from her own father broke something loose inside me. A sob escaped my lips, and I dropped to my knees on the entryway rug, holding the phone tightly against my ear. "I told her she's staying in the guest room for now," Arthur continued, his tone turning fiercely protective, not of his daughter, but of me. "But I told her she is not to contact you. I'm going to come over to the house later today, Mark. Not to argue and not to make excuses for her. I'm coming over to help you secure the place, and we're going to figure out what the next steps are. You're a son to me, Mark. That doesn't change just because my daughter lost her damn mind." True to his word, Arthur arrived at my house just after 1 o'clock that afternoon. The heavy rumble of his Ford F-150 turning into the driveway pulled me out of a catatonic daze on the living room couch. I hadn't slept a single wink, and my eyes felt like they were full of sand. I stood up, smoothing down my rumpled shirt, and opened the front door just as he was stepping onto the porch. He was carrying a heavy red plastic toolbox in his right hand and a brand new set of deadbolts in a plastic clamshell package under his arm. He didn't say a word at first. He just set the toolbox down on the porch mat, stepped forward, and wrapped his massive arms around my shoulders in a tight, crushing hug. He patted my back with his heavy hand, a gesture of silent solidarity that spoke louder than any speech he could have given. When he finally pulled back, he looked at me, his eyes dark with a mixture of sorrow and a fierce, simmering anger. "You look like hell, son," he said softly, his deep voice scraping through the quiet afternoon air. "I feel like it, Arthur," I managed to say, stepping back to let him into the house. He walked into the entryway, his eyes immediately dropping to the floor, then looking up toward the stairs. He knew exactly what had happened up there, and I could see the muscles in his jaw clenching as he processed being in the space where his daughter had completely destroyed her life. He didn't ask to go upstairs. Instead, he set his tools down on the kitchen island and immediately went to work. For the next 2 hours, the house was filled with the sharp, mechanical sounds of power drills and the metallic clinking of hardware. Arthur replaced every single exterior lock on the house, the front door, the back slider, the garage side entry, and even the basement door. He worked with a quiet, intense focus, treating the task like a solemn duty. I tried to help, handing him screws and holding the flashlights, but my hands were still shaking too much to be of any real use. While he was tightening the final screws on the back door, he finally spoke up, keeping his back turned to me as he worked the screwdriver. "I called Julian's older brother about an hour before I came over here," Arthur said, his tone flat and even. "I told him Julian's crap was sitting out by the curb. I told him if someone didn't come pick it up by sunset, I was going to load it into the back of my truck and take it straight to the county dump." His brother showed up with a trailer 20 minutes later. "It's all gone, Mark." I looked out the kitchen window toward the curb. The black trash bags and the guitar cases were gone, leaving nothing but a faint square of flattened, yellowing grass where they had rested on the lawn. A small part of the crushing weight on my chest lifted, but the emptiness that replaced it felt vast and terrifying. "Thank you, Arthur," I whispered, leaning against the counter. I don't know what I would have done today without you. Arthur set the screwdriver down on the counter with a heavy thud and turned around to face me, wiping his grease-stained hands on a rag. You would have survived, Mark. Because you're a man of character. This is going to be a long, ugly road, and I'm not going to sugarcoat it for you. The divorce is going to be painful, and the paperwork is going to suck the life out of you for a while. But you will get through it. And I want you to hear me clearly on this. My daughter made her bed, and she is going to sleep in it. I'm helping her line up a lawyer, not to fight you, but to make sure she signs whatever papers you put in front of her without dragging this out. She isn't taking this house from you. I'll make damn sure of that. Hearing him say the word divorce aloud made it real in a way it hadn't been before. It wasn't just a fight. It was the formal termination of the future I had envisioned. After Arthur left, promising to check in on me the next morning, the reality of my new existence settled in. The house felt like a museum dedicated to a life that had been abruptly canceled. Over the next 3 weeks, I went through the motions of living like a ghost. I took a leave of absence from work, telling my boss there was a severe family emergency. My days became a blur of consultations with a family law attorney, signing retaining walls of documents, and sitting in the dark of my living room, watching the shadows shift across the walls. Chloe tried to text me from a new number a week after the incident. I stared at the screen for a long time, watching the little typing bubbles appear and disappear before the message finally came through. Mark, please, just 5 minutes. Let me explain how things got so out of hand. I am drowning in guilt. Please. I didn't reply. I blocked the number immediately, just as my lawyer had advised. There was nothing left to explain. The image of them together on our bed was an answer that required no further elaboration. As for Julian, he vanished completely from the social circles we shared. I found out later through a mutual high school friend that he had packed up his car and driven across the country to Austin, Texas, completely cutting ties with everyone in Columbus. He had left behind his reputation, his oldest friend, and the woman he had crossed every moral boundary to be with. He had destroyed my life and in the process completely ruined his own. One evening, about a month after that fateful Tuesday, I finally found the strength to go back up into the master bedroom. I had been sleeping on the basement sectional, the irony of which wasn't lost on me, because I couldn't bear the thought of stepping into the room where the betrayal had occurred. But I knew that if I was ever going to move forward, I had to reclaim my space. I walked into the room carrying a fresh set of sheets I had bought at a local department store earlier that afternoon. The room still smelled faintly of her lavender perfume, a ghost of a presence that made my chest ache with a dull, throbbing pain. I walked over to the bed, stripped the old blankets and sheets off the mattress with a deliberate, aggressive force, and stuffed them into a trash bag to be thrown away. As I pulled the fitted sheet off the final corner of the mattress, my hand brushed against something small and metallic that had been wedged tightly between the mattress and the heavy wooden headboard. I frowned, reaching down into the gap, my fingers wrapping around a cold piece of metal. I pulled it out into the fading evening light. It was a small silver guitar pick, engraved with the initials J.R., Julian Reynolds. I stared at the tiny piece of plastic in the palm of my hand, a physical artifact of the betrayal that had taken place in the very heart of my home. My hands began to shake again, but this time, it wasn't the trembling of a broken-hearted husband. It was the steady, cold vibration of a man who was finally letting go of the grief and embracing the harsh, clean reality of his freedom. I walked over to the bedroom window, pushed the glass up, and looked out over the quiet suburban street. The sun was setting, painting the Ohio sky in brilliant streaks of orange, crimson, and deep gold. It was beautiful, a reminder that the world kept spinning, that life kept moving forward, regardless of the wreckage left behind in individual bedrooms. I placed the silver guitar pick on the windowsill, took a deep, steady breath of the cool evening air, and closed my eyes. The truth had shocked me, it had broken me, and it had brought my entire world to its knees. But as I opened my eyes and looked out at the horizon, I realized something else. The truth had also set me free.